Welcome everybody. Welcome to the launch of the 2019 annual report of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. I have it here in my hand. You can get it online, and for those of you who are passing the centre or who want it, you can let us know. We'll send you a hard copy, but welcome everybody. I would just like to say that we had planned to have the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee TD, with us here to launch the annual report for us. However, just very recently she has been called into another meeting and cannot be here. But she has made a pre-recorded message, which we will play for you later on, and we're very grateful to the Minister for so doing. So welcome everybody, welcome to all the members of the Oireachtas who have joined us, to the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Hazel Shue, to our great colleagues in the Garda Síochána, Executive Director Kate Mulcairns, and the Chief Superintendent Declan Daly, to our colleagues and partners from the Department of Justice, to our TUSLA partners, to colleagues from the Rape Crisis Forum and the Rape Crisis Network, to all our NGO colleagues who are out there, and those who have worked with us over the years and those who we plan to work with in the future, and to the board and staff, and particularly our volunteers, you're all very welcome. 2019 seems like ages ago, and so much has happened since December last year, particularly since the country went into lockdown in March. But it would be remiss of me at the outset not to mention upfront the stellar work done by Noeline Blackwell and the staff of the DRCC in seamlessly transitioning from working in a building to working from home and supporting our clients over Zoom, teamwork, and other communication modes without any loss of service. It's really highly recommended. And from the bottom of my heart and that of my fellow board members, I want to thank you and acknowledge you, Noeline. The transition was rendered seamless in 2019 because we invested heavily in technology and telephone systems. That's apart from Noeline's stewardship of it all funded by the very generous donors that, who are very supportive of the centre. We cannot operate without this funding, and all of you out there, if you're listening in, a very loud thank you. In 2019, the DRCC was 40 years old. Unbelievable, really. And in 2019, we decided to look back over the 40 years and we reviewed how far we have come, but more importantly, how far we have to go and what still remains to be done. We marked the centre's 40 years in existence with a conference in November, looking at what learnings we have from the past and more importantly, again, planning what we needed to do in the future in terms of closing gaps that can still exist. We looked back with some early founders of the centre, Evelyn Conlon, Barbara Egan, Anne O'Donnell and Olive Braden. And we were struck by the level of commitment and care that these early pioneers and campaigners showed the victims of sexual violence. They spoke out against rape and sexual abuse in an era before any investigation of institutional abuse took place, and at a time when there was no such crime as marital rape, which I don't think became a crime until around 1978, 90, beg your pardon, Noeline is correcting me here. And many people in their own social circles, those pioneers' social circles, probably were by turns puzzled and sometimes horrified at these pioneers' involvement in what was a very dark side of life and oftentimes unspoken in those times. These women kept faith with victims of sexual violence through those dark days, and to the extent that the helpline that they established then runs now 24/7, and the number of people that it helps has grown from 80 in 1979 to more than 14,000 in 2019. The dual mission of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and the National 24-hour helpline is to prevent the harm and to heal the trauma and rape of sexual violence and rape. And it's delivered through 4 main strategic goals. And they are to support, number 1, the victims, through ongoing counselling, to support the victims and the survivors. And 2, to eliminate the tolerance of sexual violence in our society, which has become a big focus of our area as it has become very challenging. And thirdly, to support and promote survivors' rights. And then finally, to ensure that the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and the National 24-hour helpline is a strong, sustainable entity. No one of these is more important than the other as they blend and build upon one another. Our key priority is, and always has been, to ensure that the needs of those who have experienced sexual violence are met and that their rights are respected. In 2019, our annual report shows an increase again in the capacity of the organisation to sustain constant, empathetic, non-judgmental support to people who are coping with the impact of sexual violence and rape. Thus, we registered a rise in the number of clients for face-to-face therapy and in people contacting the National 24-hour service in last year. We saw a substantial, a 42% increase among people we supported at the Sexual Assault Treatment Unit attending the Rotunda Hospital. We accompanied more people on their pathway through the justice system, either in Garda stations or in the courts. Brave survivors continue to speak out about their experience to us and to other rape crisis centres and in public. And from that early, brave Lavinia Kerwick's presentation of the first ever victim impact report to last week's disclosure by Aoibhinn Ní Shúilleabháin. All public disclosures by victims serve to give courage to others to speak out and also to get help. At our anniversary conference, survivors stated plainly how they would still lack basic supports and even understanding from the state and other structures. So we have a lot of work to do. Hearing daily from survivors and understanding the enduring harm they suffer because of sexual violence and rape, we're more than ever determined to challenge the continuing tolerance of such violence in our society. A major focus for us in the past decade has been to build the capacity of our young people to understand healthy relationships and consensual sexual behaviour. We were able to advance our work last year with young people in a significant way. However, it's not just young people who need better understanding that the core sexual assault, including rape, is the absence of consent. It's the violation of our human rights. And it's also an equality issue in terms of power, where one person exerts power over another. The Centre is committed to building a wider community and understanding on this topic. Popular culture and laws and systems still need work. And in 2020, and Noeline will probably talk about it later, a major focus of our work will be looking at consent, and where we will focus on the attitudes and behaviours across all strata of society. However, Ireland's ratification of the Istanbul Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence marked a significant advance in our country's government's recognition of the scale of violence against women. And in Ireland, as Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said, it's an epidemic, and we need to be very much aware of that. This Istanbul Convention offers a framework for government and judicial reform where it's needed. In 2019, we continued to contribute to public policy areas such as harmful communications, internet abuse, the process in rape trials, and much more. Finally, but not least, we continue to build a strong, sustainable organisation. We cannot survive without doing that. And while the state funds around 85% of the cost of our therapeutic services, the remaining 15% and all of our other work in education and training, in awareness raising, in research and more must be paid for through public and corporate fundraising and philanthropic grants. So again, I reiterate that we are eternally grateful to each and every one of our funders, from our state funder, TUSLA, and the Department of Justice and Equality last year, through to important corporate individuals, donors, individual donors, and event organisers. We rely on every cent to keep our vital services maintained and to meet the growing need. The board of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, by working tirelessly and giving of their wisdom and their time and commitment to the work of the centre during 2019, ensured that the DRCC strategy and structure was optimised in order to meet its objectives. Again, I'd like to thank the staff and the interns of the centre for their continued and dedicated commitment to the mission and work of the centre. But I want to recognise in a special way those volunteers who gave their time and their hearts to in support of many of our functions and in many ways throughout the year. I'd also like to thank those with whom we collaborated in 2019, because it takes many stakeholders to drive the agenda and the mission and vision which we have. So thank you all very much. And now I'd like to hand you over to Angela McCarthy, who's the Director of Therapeutic Services here, who'll take you through the highlights of the statistics from 2019. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks very much, Nolene. Sorry, Anne-Marie, I should say. Sorry. Welcome, everybody, to this distinguished audience and to all the people who are attending on this video webinar. My task really is to present you with a brief summary of the statistics for 2019 and an analysis of the trends. So I'm going to start by looking at the National 24-Hour Helpline. And as you probably know, the helpline is operated by staff telephone counsellors by day and by trained volunteers at night, at weekends and during public holidays. The volunteers are trained, supervised and provided with a 24-hour backup service by the volunteer services team. The total number of contacts on the National 24-Hour Helpline reached 14,159 in 2019, an increase of 5.93% in 2018 and 10.14% higher than in 2017. The number of first-time callers was 7,704, an increase of 3.79% on 2018 and 17.21% higher than in 2017. In 2019, the number of calls specifically about rape was 5,237, an increase of 11.12% compared to the 2018 figures, and an increase of 10.18% compared to 2017 figures. So just want to pause and look at those figures for a few minutes and analyse them. The figure for the number of calls specifically about rape, 5,237, is more than 46 times higher than in 2016, when there were 3,579 calls about rape. Even more striking has been the increase of 82% in calls about rape since 2015, when the number of such calls stood at 2,876. This dramatic increase in calls regarding rape may well reflect an increase in the incidence of rape occurring, or an increase in reporting, or both. It has had a huge impact on the demand for crisis appointments here in the centre, which are offered to victims who've experienced sexual violence within the past 6 months and which get priority over every other type of appointment. We are endeavouring to ensure that people who are on our crisis list will be seen as soon as possible. I'm moving on now to look at the other part of volunteer services, which is accompaniment services. Our trained volunteers offered accompaniment and support at the Sexual Assault Treatment Unit, or SATU, to 300 victims during 2019, and also provided support to 240 of their family and friends. And our Accompaniment and Justice service supported 45 victim survivors in 2019 over 161 days of court or Garda accompaniment. And in addition to the actual accompaniment service, 49 victims who were involved in court cases or in Garda reporting were supported by phone, text and email. And in addition to those services, DRCC volunteers also delivered 69 talks in secondary schools and colleges. So I'm going to move on now to our therapy services, counselling and therapy. In 2019, 17 part-time therapists working in 2 teams provided services 6 days a week in Leeson Street, and additionally provided 4 outreach services in Tala University Hospital, Coolock Civic Centre, Docus Women's Prison, and in a new outreach service in North Dublin, which opened in mid-August 2019. This new service, funded by TUSLA, is an interagency service including DRCC and 2 domestic violence services, Sunnis and Evenus, to provide an integrated service in the North Dublin area. This was the first new outreach we had been involved in over 10 years, so it was really exciting. And working alongside our colleagues in the domestic violence service has been really rewarding. We provide counselling there 3 days a week involving 5 therapists over the 3 days, usually in pairs, and then on Saturdays, 3 people working together. A further new development in 2019 was the development of an online support programme called Moving Forward from Sexual Violence. And this was for delivery in 2020 and headed up by our lead therapist, Eileen Noonan. And I'm glad to say that is operational now, and you'll be hearing about it in next year's annual report. Moving on then to look at individual therapy. In 2019, a total of 617 clients were seen. That was an increase of 6% compared to the 2018 total of 582 clients, and an increase of 12.59% compared to the 2017 figure of 548. There was a 25% increase in total clients seen in 2019 compared with the 2016 figure of 495. And of the total 617 clients seen in 2019, 365 were new clients seen within that year. That was 59.16%. This was an increase of 7.34% on the number of new clients seen in 2018, 340, and an increase of 25% in comparison with new clients in 2016, 293. In terms of appointments delivered, the total number of appointments delivered in 2019 was 4,619, and this showed an increase of 9.22% compared to the 2018 figure of 4,228. In addition to individual work, our therapists were also involved with group work with clients of the centre. 2 therapists facilitated a 6-hour workshop through the medium of art for 8 therapists in November, and a further 2 therapists facilitated a rape recovery group over 6 weeks from mid-October for 10 participants. Together, the therapists delivered 138 group therapy hours in 2019, bringing the total therapy hours delivered in 2019 to 4,759. So I'm just going to comment on the statistics to say really that the information is collected in these statistics relates to details disclosed by callers and clients using the services of Dublin Rape Crisis Centre during 2019. But the primary aim of the centre is to provide confidential support and information, and for this reason our statistics have varying levels of detail, but we are always aiming at extreme accuracy. And in that regard, I'd like to express my thanks to Shirley Scott, our policy manager, who always double checks my figures and indeed the figures for the centre. And we also have an external monitor who goes through all the figures to check their accuracy. But I suppose we would know that the value of the true value of the statistics contained within our report is that they tell of the experiences of the people who availed of our service. And hopefully also they show the commitment of all of us, of our volunteers, of our staff, management, the board of directors, all those who are funding us, and all our supporters, that we're all aiming to deliver on the mission statement of the Rape Crisis Centre, which is to prevent the harm and heal the trauma of rape and other forms of sexual violence. Thank you very much, and I'm now going to hand you back to Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much, Angela. At this stage, we thought we would have had the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee TD, with us, but as I said earlier, she's unavoidably detained. But she went to the trouble of making a pre-recording just a couple of hours ago, for which we're extremely grateful. And I'd now like to show you that pre-recording.
Ladies and gentlemen, CEO Nolene Blackwell, colleagues and friends, it's an absolute honour for me today to launch the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre annual report of 2019. I know that the last year has been an important milestone for the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre as you marked 40 years since you first began your critical work. If I could first say, all of Irish society owes a debt of those who earlier pioneered in your organisation. This includes Anne O'Donnell, Evelyn Conlon, Barbara Egan and Olive Braden, all of whom gave victims of sexual violence a place where they could be heard, where they could be believed and could be supported. Ireland has changed dramatically in those 40 years and we have made very significant progresses. But I don't have to tell you, I don't have to say to you, we still have a significant problem of sexual violence in Ireland. Your report itself paints a very stark picture. Over the course of the year, your volunteers saw 300 victims and over 1,400 contacts to your helpline. I've also listened carefully to your feedback that concerns remain in particular about the need for a much speedier resolution of cases in the interest of victims. Ireland owes a debt of gratitude to you, to your staff, and to the many volunteers led so ably by Nolene, and the vital work that the Centre has done across these years and the necessary progress for which you have advocated. But it's very clear from your annual report and from the feedback that you have gathered from the public that there is a definite need to make much more significant progress and to do it urgently. I want to take the opportunity, maybe if I could, to reflect on where we go from here in our shared efforts to prevent and to address sexual violence in all of its forms. As a new minister, and indeed as a young woman, I am determined to use this office, the Department of Justice, to drive for real and substantial change in relation to sexual violence. I'm struck by the Centre's vision for a society in which sexual violence is not tolerated, but that when it does occur, survivors are provided with information and care that supports their empowerment and their resiliency. I share this dual focus, which involves positive attention to prevention and societal attitudes, as well as ensuring that we fully and that we comprehensively address sexual violence when it occurs. In my own area of responsibility, this of course means ensuring that the justice system, the criminal justice system, responds to and supports victims of sexual violence. As I'm sure all of you will be aware, last month I published the O'Malley Review regarding protections for vulnerable witnesses. I know many of you have keenly anticipated this report, this review, and indeed many of you have participated by making detailed submissions to the group who had worked on it. The result is a thorough and an expert examination of the entire criminal justice process around sexual offences as it is encountered by victims and other vulnerable witnesses at each point, from the initial reporting of an offence through to the very end of any court proceedings. I was disappointed, I suppose, to see from your survey that some of you didn't believe that it would improve our justice system. I appreciate that all of us share a feeling of urgency for change, for this to be delivered in this area, but I would urge everyone to read the report and to engage with my department in its implementation, which I am absolutely determined will be done comprehensively and will be done as soon as possible. I'm convinced that the reforms identified within the report have the potential to transform the manner in which sexual crime is dealt with in Ireland, not only the treatment of victims in the justice system, but indeed looking at the broader societal attitudes and in particular focusing on prevention of sexual crime. The review itself stresses the key importance that all victims should be treated with respect, they should be treated with dignity throughout the entire process, and includes more than 50 detailed recommendations that are spread out into 4 groups of overarching themes. Firstly, we look at promoting a better awareness of victims' rights through legislation. Secondly, the promotion of education, the meaning and the importance of consent. Thirdly, improving interagency cooperation and exchange of information, particularly in relation to services for victims. And finally, the report looks to ensure consistency in service delivery so that one person doesn't receive a different level of service depending on where they are. The necessary analysis, the planning work has already commenced, and I have tasked my officials with development of a comprehensive implementation plan, of course after engaging with relevant stakeholders, and that includes you. I intend to bring this plan to government before the end of October, and I hope that I can count, in fact I know that I can count on your input in this important task. Already now, while the plan is being prepared, I've identified a number of key recommendations on which immediate work can begin and should begin, and I have prioritised these within my own work. Firstly, working with the Legal Aid Board to ensure the victims of sexual crime can access legal advice and the support that they need. Establishing a single portal, something that is comprehensive, which provides source of information to victims of sexual crime, their rights, the services that are already available to them. We're looking at starting a public awareness campaign, working with education around the meaning of consent. Looking at completing the rollout of the Specialist Garda Divisional Protective Units across the entire country. I'm also working with my department to begin drafting of legislation. This is to provide for preliminary hearings to help avoid delay in sexual offences cases. And finally, we're working to ensure the development of the necessary specialist programmes for trainings This is for members of Garda Síochána, the legal profession and others who are participating in any kind of professional capacity in sexual offence cases, investigations, trials, and this also includes engaging with the newly established Judicial Council, which would allow for training in particular for judges. I am absolutely confident that rapid progress in these important areas can have significant benefits for all of us, particularly those who are victims, and there has already been some progress, I'm pleased to say. For example, as part of the July stimulus programme and the investment plan, the government prioritised funding to support the full rollout of the Garda Divisional Protective Service units. I'm pleased to say that a total of 21 of these units have already been rolled out throughout the country, and I understand from speaking to the Garda Commissioner that the remainder of these units will be established by the end of this month. My department is also, as I mentioned earlier, preparing legislation to deal with harassment and harmful communications. This includes the distribution of intimate images without consent. This includes the problem of so-called revenge porn, as it's been come to known to become, which is also the capacity for such devastating impact on its victims. It contributes to such a toxic environment of objectification and disregard for the importance of consent in all aspects of our intimate images. I intend to bring the proposed legislative changes on this particular issue to government later this month. From a broad policy perspective, a key action in the programme for government is a commitment to develop a third national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This will place a priority in particular on prevention and reduction, but will include a national preventative strategy and will provide us with a very clear guiding direction as to how we continue this important work. I really hope that you can see, even from these few examples that I've given you, the urgency at which I as Minister intend to treat this area of sexual violence. This is also true, I have to say, of my government colleagues, who, as you will know, will be cooperating with me on the completion of an immediate audit as to how responsibility for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is segmented across different government agencies. As you know, this audit will be undertaken in conjunction with NGOs, with the various different service providers, and again, I am very keen to ensure that your input is fully taken into account in this regard. The last area I want to mention today is around awareness raising and public education. This is a very complex task. It's one that I'm conscious too that there isn't not just a need for greater awareness among the public, but also our media in connection with reporting and the analysis of incidents involving sexual offences. My department, with the advice and of course the assistance of the advisory group, which includes the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, is midway through a multi-year awareness campaign on sexual harassment and violence. As most of you will know, this campaign, the No Excuses campaign, aims to try and raise awareness, essentially, ultimately bringing about a change in long-established behaviours and attitudes, and with the ultimate aim of decreasing and preventing sexual violence. The campaign unfortunately was paused for a number of months, of course, in the context of COVID-19 restrictions on movement and gatherings, but I'm very pleased to say that it will be starting again or resuming from the start of October. In addition, my department has developed an interagency plan to address domestic abuse and sexual violence during the pandemic. As we've unfortunately seen, it has increased significantly. This included additional funding for a wide range of organisations to adapt to maintain their services during the crisis, as well as the Still Here awareness campaign to convey the messages to all victims of sexual violence that supports, that help, that they are still there even throughout this pandemic. The Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, I have to say, were absolutely instrumental in the development of that campaign, and I'm so grateful to them and to you for your work, and I again want to thank you. There is a lot that we can learn from all of these and from the other initiatives, and again, just maybe to point out one, I'm thinking of, for example, the TikTok consent campaign that was run by the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre earlier this year. My officials are going to engage with you, with other partners, as we try to pull all of these initiatives, as we seek to bring the collaboration that has happened over the last number of months together, and obviously based and working with the recommendations of the Mali Review, that we work in cooperation with the Department of Further Education, Department of Children and so many other departments in the months and years to come. This has been a year unlike no other. Nationally and internationally, we have faced procession of shocks, of challenges, most particularly in the context, of course, of COVID-19. It has been a frightening and uncertain time, and it has been particularly frightening for those who are victims of domestic abuse. But I have been greatly heartened by the community spirit that has been shown by everybody over the last 6 months. This spirit of service was, of course, clearly evident in the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre's response to the pandemic too. And again, I want to commend the huge efforts by the staff, the volunteers who have adapted your service essentially to ensure that you remain available, that you are there for victims of sexual violence. Our state and our society is indebted to you for the dedication, the professionalism and the care that you have shown to hundreds, indeed thousands of people who are in such difficult circumstances. If there is some good to come out of any of this, it's the hope that we can build on these partnerships that have been forged as all stakeholders have come together to support those in need. And as Minister for Justice, I certainly will play my part, and I will absolutely commit myself to ensuring that we make Ireland a safer, a fairer, a more inclusive place, especially for our women. With that said, I am now delighted to formally launch the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre Annual Report for 2019. Thank you.
And huge thanks to Minister Helen McEntee for that speech and for covering so much of the areas of concern that we have in the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre as well, recognising the concerns. And as she says, recognising that this isn't just a concern of a rape crisis centre or indeed any one of the rape crisis centres or others working in the non-governmental sector against sexual violence. This is something that is now recognised as something that our entire society needs to address in several ways. One of the things we would like to say in particular was thanks for the recognition by the Department of Justice and by TUSLA, which funds so many of our therapeutic services and our clinical services, that we were a frontline service and that we needed to be kept in being during the worst of the COVID-19 restrictions, and that prioritisation of our service, recognising that home is not a safe place for so many people, and that even in cases where victims of sexual violence could not come forward because of lack of privacy, because of other things they were trying to handle and cope with, because they just weren't able to talk about things during that time. Well, they're coming forward now. And it is good to see that those core departments, health and justice, as well as our children and youth affairs, as well as our Department of Education, all of these are part of the solution as well. So we know as we change in this still uncertain time, as we've spoken about already earlier today, we know and we are committed in Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, and I am mandated by my board as CEO to say we will do our level best to reach everyone who needs help. We will continue to provide the services that we know have worked for so many people last year and in previous years, the National 24-hour helpline, helping people who have to go into the justice system, who have to go to the sexual assault treatment units, the face-to-face therapy and the individual therapy we offer to people. We will, however, also, in light of the developing understanding of the epidemic that is sexual violence, we will have to think about new ways of connecting with people. So things like our online service, like our web chat, which is now just being launched, even today is part of the formal announcement of our web chat. Other ways of connecting with people, other ways of hearing survivors. We'll have to work on other ways of understanding how we address the change in culture as well as the improvement of systems. And in relation to culture, there is that bit about what is it that we as a society need to talk about or think about in order to reduce our tolerance of the harm and the crime that is sexual violence. And as my chairperson, Anne-Marie Gill, said at the start, we are investing substantially in trying to understand better, to have better conversations, to make us a better society. And we also then have to recognize that sexual violence will not go away just because we'd like it to, and there will need to be new ways of accountability. The minister mentioned a survey that we had put out in the days before the annual report, where we asked people to tell us what they thought about some of the issues raised by the report chaired by the country expert on sexual offences, Tom O'Malley, law lecturer, barrister, operating out of NUI Galway. And I'm not going to go through it now because we will be engaging with the minister and others, but survivors very kindly participated in our survey and gave us information on what they thought of the report and the issues that were raised in the report. And I might ask for those slides now, Tom, if I may. So in terms of the questions we asked were fairly basic questions in some ways. We wanted to know, would the recommendations made in the review improve the justice system as it relates to the investigation and prosecution of sexual offences? Less than 10% thought no. Nearly half the people thought it would improve the system. To be perfectly honest, if they don't improve the system, we're in real trouble because the system is so inimical for victims of sexual offences. And the truth is that what the O'Malley Review did in some way was to identify that you cannot treat sexual offences the way you can other offences. Intimate violence offences in the area of sexual violence or domestic violence need special treatment, and this report shows this. Do the recommendations go far enough? Most of you thought they didn't. And in truth, we would agree with that as well, because, for instance, we would have liked to see a better system of legal support for victims, but nonetheless, we are very encouraged by it as a significant step forward. Next slide, please. So what were the main things that you thought were important, those of you who answered our report? And the biggest issue was, can the people that victims have to talk to, can they know what they're talking about? Can they understand what they're doing? So access to specialist training for all those in the justice system. That's the Gardaí, who are doing training already, but it is inconsistent. For members of the judiciary and legal professionals dealing with sexual offences. And again, it is striking how much both Tom O'Malley, this absolute expert, learned about the victim experience through the review, a similar experience to John Gillen in Northern Ireland, who had been a prosecutor, a defender and a judge, but said he had not understood the victim experience until he had spoken with them after he had retired and taken on this job. The second thing, and a perennial, we hear about it the whole time, our court accompaniment went up massively in 2019, the delay, where cases are not properly managed, where people turn up to give evidence and there is delay. So that was a really big issue for people as well. Then practical supports for victims throughout the system, as well as legal supports for victims. So the practical supports were the third biggest thing, then legal supports, and then wide-ranging information for victims, and the use of pre-trial hearings to determine things that don't have to be thought about on the day. So better management of the system, but more than that, people understanding what the victim experience was like and responding appropriately. Next slide, please. So then the most important recommendations for people who answered our survey were reduce the delays, provide the training, give the supports to witnesses and victims, and let's have good information. And I know that Minister McEntee did address a number of those in her speech. We sent these themes to her in advance, so she was able to respond a bit. So we definitely will engage, and we will be encouraging survivors who've been through the system to help us to better understand how to communicate that into the Department of Justice. And the final slide, please, is the ways that it didn't go further. So better legal representation for victims, absolutely. There wasn't enough about training and sentencing. Now, the thing about sentencing, and I know that several of people who are on this call are very insistent about that. It was outside the terms of reference, so it's another day's work. The O'Malley Review will not finish our work in the justice system, but it will certainly drive it forward to a great extent. Thanks very much. That's great on the slides. So I just wanted to include those because people had gone to the trouble of putting it in. The Minister had gone to the trouble of thinking about it before she came back to us. So that's the area of accountability that is likely to take a good bit of our time and thought into the future. The other things as well, though, how do we as a society better understand sexual violence? And if we understand it, how do we stop it? Because it is so harmful for those on whom it impacts, and how do we connect? So we already connect with a whole lot of people. We connect with all of the people that we try to help who are victims in the system. We are deeply grateful to all those we collaborate with, all the people who fund us. My chair, Anne-Marie Gill, again mentioned this along the way at the outset, how important all of this is to us. The people that we connect with, the people that we talk to, the people who will talk out. And again, to mention Davine O'Sullivan, who spoke out just this week, and Lavinia Kerwick, who's on the front of our annual report for this year and spoke out all those years ago as well to change the system. We need people to be able to not have to talk about this if they don't want to. But we need, when they do talk out, that we recognise that there is a lot of scandals still in our society, that sexual violence isn't properly dealt with. We will continue to aim to provide the services that victims need, to amplify the voice of victims, and we will continue to try to be the strong, sustainable operation in spite of the fact that actually the current pandemic has impacted on our capacity to help, even at the level at which we're operating right now. And we know the level at which we're operating does not address the need of enough people. So we'll continue to work forward for that. And finally, I too want to add my thanks to all of the personnel of Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, to our staff and volunteers who are interchangeable in everything except in the way we describe them like that. Their commitment, their passion, their flexibility, their capacity to change, their understanding of the need to continue the services over the past number of very difficult months is absolutely without parallel, or probably there are other parallels, but we could not have asked for more. To my very supportive board who just ensure that we are continuing to do as much as we possibly can do, but are totally supportive. And to my colleague Anne-Marie Gill, to my chairperson Anne-Marie Gill, who's sitting across the table from me right now at a socially distanced divide, also a huge thank you to her for her personal support. To all of those who have invested in us, if you feel like investing more, we'll take it actually, because we have things we will want to do into the future, but we appreciate I suppose the solidarity that you've shown, as well as the practical investment you have given, and you know, things like pro bono help as well for so many people over the time. Thank you all for coming online today to help us launch our 2019 annual report, to help us to know that you're interested in what we're doing in the future. We wish you all well. We thank you. We thank Minister McEntee in particular for her agreement in the very early days of her ministry to come and launch our annual report for us. And look, it got a bit more virtual than maybe she meant it to be, but it is done now. The report is up on our website, www.drcc.ie. Our services are still there. Probably the best way still into them is through the National 24-hour helpline for any of you who need it, 1-800-77-88-88. And our fundraising page is open there as well. Sorry, I can't help but ask for all of that. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to working